Hello, everybody. It is Monday, December 18th, 2023. Welcome to episode 69 of the Old Men Magic podcast. Alex, are you laughing? Are you laughing? No. It's not funny at all. We're too mature for that shit. We have a few topics to discuss today, Alex. One, we have some deck discussion. I'm going to talk about mono green Oath Ponza that's putting up good numbers all across the pre-modern scene. We're going to talk about two, a unique collector's piece that hit the Magic the Gathering market. It's way out of my price range, but it's super cool. I wanted to talk a little bit about it. And three, today we have the return of the Old Men Magic Commander Corner, where we learn how to play CEDH, which on the Old Men Magic podcast stands for Casual EDH. Before we get started, I'm going to do a little bit of begging. I'm going to say, please like, please subscribe, please hit that notification bell. I was watching a channel the other day that I enjoy a lot, and I forget to like. I just sit there. I watch all the gameplay vids. It's Farmstead MTG. He's an old school gameplay channel, and I don't even think about it. But a couple episodes ago, he interrupted. He's like, hey, if you're still watching, please like, please hit that notification bell. And I was like, oh my God, I should like. And it worked on me. I did it. I hit that like button. Because even though I like all of his videos, right? Every one I watch, I enjoy. I like it. But I forget to actually hit that like button. So sometimes it's useful.
I'm bad about that.
Sometimes it's useful.
Let's all be better. We can all be better about it.
We also started something new here at the Old Man Magic podcast. I want to talk about it. I'm going to shill for a second. We've never really shilled. It's a buy me a coffee. We have a buymeacoffee.com at Old Men Magic. It's a few months old. If you enjoy the show, you're feeling the Christmas spirit, buy us a coffee or two. We got 2 supporters already, Alex. This is without any promotion of the Old Men Magic podcast. Yes, they are 2 people who we know already. We went to high school with them. Shout out to the Ruth brothers. They found us. They found us on YouTube. They sent us a coffee. We were very excited by that. I love free coffees. I think here they cost you. What do they cost you here? $2. $2, yeah. Throw us $2. That'd be fantastic. I went to Starbucks the other day, Alex. I had a long day at work. It was like a 12-hour day. I was leaving. I was like, I'm gonna treat myself. I decided to stop by Starbucks on the way home. I got myself a Grande Nitro Cold Brew. It's like $5.50, but it's worth it sometimes. When I pulled up, the girl working there, she just handed it to me and she goes, it's on us today. And I was like, I should have said, thank you, I really appreciate it. But instead, I thought to myself, what is happening? And then I was just like, oh, thanks. And I drove off because I didn't know how to react when somebody just hands me something for free.
Is this a trap?
I actually had these thoughts. I thought maybe they dropped it on the ground, which doesn't make any sense. I was like, immediately, no, that can't be this liquid. If they had dropped it on the ground, it would have all spilled out. So it wasn't like food. I was like, maybe somebody stuck their finger in it. I don't know. And then I thought, stop having these thoughts, Steve. It was just somebody trying to do something nice for you. Just accept it. So with that out of the way, we've shilled. I've shilled more than I've ever shilled before. Let's get right into the episode, where I'm going to talk about Oath Ponza, aka Terravore Oath. This is the new hotness in pre-modern MTG, at least in my mind. You know, some people are excited about it. I love it because I love mono green decks. I mean, I've been thinking a lot about mono green decks, building different types of mono green decks in different formats. As someone who just likes turning creatures sideways, even more so now that I've gotten back into Magic, these are the type of decks that like really speak to me. They also, another great thing about them is they tend to be very budget friendly.
Mm-hmm.
They tend to do fairly well in a lot of new metas. They're not usually at the top. They're often not a top tier deck, but you know, you can put one together for cheap, show up, play a lot of different formats, and win some games with a lot of different mono green decks. So this Oath Ponza deck, or TerraOath Oath has 2 cards in it that are really the stars. And the first one is Terravor. I'm going to pull this up. Terravor is a rare that was originally printed in Odyssey. It's been reprinted recently in Dominaria Remastered. Has a casting cost of 1 colorless, 2 green, and it is a summon Lurgoyf. You remember what a Lurgoyf is?
Yes,
Alex?
I was surprised to find that now it's a whole Lurgoyfs are a whole thing, and there are more Lurgoyfs now. When we played, it was just one creature.
It was just one creature. That creature is a rare from Ice Age. It's 2 colorless, 2 green, star power, 1+ star toughness. Lurgoyf has power equal to the total number of creatures in all graveyards, and toughness equal to 1+ the total number of creatures in all graveyards. So you see the theme is carried through here with the Terravor, which is star trample. Terravor's power and toughness are each equal to the number of land cards in all graveyards. It has a rating of 4.139 on Gatherer, current market price of $4.09 for the original. You can pick up the Dominaria Mastered reprint for 8 cents, which this was a really sweet set, in my opinion, when it came out, because it gave us a lot of reprints of a lot of cool cards. But it looks like they printed, and it seemed like people really enjoyed it. But now I'm seeing some people be kind of upset about it because they bought the boxes and now all the cards aren't worth much. Which this is just something that's going to happen. I mean, if you want reprints, the reprints are going to drop in. Everything's going to drop in price.
You're talking about them being mad of the current prices of Dominaria Remastered?
Dominaria
cards?
Remastered, yeah. Yeah.
Cards.
Yeah, the older cards, a lot of these have dropped in price too, but I mean, I wouldn't say they cratered. A lot of them have just come back to where they were like pre-COVID craziness with all the insane price increases. I don't know, maybe you can pick up some of these boxes now super cheap. I'd have to look into that because I think Dominaria Master would be fun just to crack open and draft. Anyways, Terravor, it's obvious that it does big things when combined with land destruction, right? You put lands in the graveyard, this gets huge. My initial thought when seeing this card was it's like an interesting twist on the classic green-white Erhnam-Geddon deck. You ramp out a 4/5 Djinn, a 4/5 Erhnam. You blow up all the lands with Geddon. You ride the Djinn to victory. You don't have to worry about the Forest Walk because you blew up the lands. You need to play Terravor Geddon differently, of course. I mean, Erhnam-Geddon, you want to play the creature and then blow up the land. If you cast this before you blow up any land, it's a 0/0. It goes straight to the graveyard. So what do? You blow up as much land as you can prior to casting Terravor. Or you use a strategy that mills land into your graveyard before playing the Terravor. That second strategy, the strategy where you mill a bunch of stuff into your graveyard and bring out the Terravor, is where the second star of this deck comes in, this Terravor Oath deck. And that card is Oath of Druids. Card that pretty much everybody who plays Premodern knows. Probably everybody who plays a bunch of other formats knows also. Banned in Legacy. This is a card that we talked about for the first time on episode 15 of the Omen Magic podcast.
Oh, was it?
Where we discussed the Oath Cycle. That's when we first learned about this card, I think. It's a rare from Exodus originally, reprinted in Commander 2016. It's 1 colorless, 1 green enchantment. During each player's upkeep, if that player controls fewer creatures than target opponent, the player may reveal cards from his or her library until he or she reveals a creature card. The player puts that creature into play and all other revealed cards into his or her graveyard. So this is a powerful symmetrical effect, but you can build your deck, you can build around it in a way that really makes the benefit asymmetrical for you, right? So when we first talked about this back in episode 55, I think we were like, okay, what do you do with this? You can play with cards that give your opponent's creatures. That's when we found Forbidden Orchard. We thought Varchild's War Riders, Feldegriff. You can have a sacrifice engine out, where maybe you have some smaller creatures. You funnel them all into the sack outlet to get rid of them. Then you can oath out something giant. You can just run 1 or 2 big beaters. So Oath Ponza, aka Terravore Oath, uses really that last strategy. The benefits of having Oath are generally asymmetrical for you because you just run 1 creature for the most part, which is Terravore.
So anytime you use the Oath of Druids, you're gonna get your creature. You're just gonna usually probably mill a whole bunch of other cards in order to do so.
You're going to mill a whole bunch of other cards. You're going to see how these decks are built. Because of the way these decks are built, you're going to mill a bunch of lands probably, and your Terravore should come out significantly larger than anything your opponent can bring out, and it has trample.
Yeah.
4.596 on Gather, a current market price of $7.69 for the Exodus copy.
Nice, nice.
Nice.
Yeah, giving Terravore trample, man, with that casting cost too, it's like very strong card.
Yeah. Those are the 2 primary cards. Now I wanted to look at some Oath Ponza decks. Specifically, I'm going to look at some decks. They were listed on TC Decks and were built by somebody named TV Tyrant. We're going to look, he's been playing this deck for a while now. We're going to look at how it evolved over the last year or so. If you're interested in learning more about how the deck was designed and how to play it, I would recommend checking out a podcast episode with TV Tyrant and Ricky Thorson on the I Have Questions podcast. It's a pre-modern podcast. It's called I Have Questions. But if you look for it in your podcast app, it's I have question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark, question mark. So I find it kind of, it was kind of hard for me to find searching because when I typed in I have questions, it didn't show up.
I see.
Yeah. So one thing to note too, before I talk about, this is a much better version of a mono green lane destruction deck that I've been building. So when I first started playing Magic again, like a year and a half ago, I didn't even know what Premodern is. I just decided that I wanted to build like some old school decks because that's what I remembered. That's what was exciting to me and interesting to me. But I don't have an extensive collection. I got rid of almost all my cards. Even back in the day, I didn't have an extensive collection. I never had any power. I don't see myself buying any power unless I hit the lottery because it's way too expensive. And I don't want a significant percentage of my net worth being in Magic the Gathering cards. It makes me nervous. So I was like, what kind of budget old school decks can I build? And then that's when I saw, some examples of budget old school green, how they can do fairly well. They're not winning a lot of tournaments, but they do fairly well. And they're fun to play. They do things I enjoy doing. I like playing Land War Elves, turning them sideways to ramp mana, playing Killer Bees, for instance. That's exciting. Playing Birds of Paradise. Love them. Elves of Dark Shadow. Love them. So I started building an old school mono green deck. And I kind of went the mono green tempo route where you try to cast spells, above the curve with manimals, mana elves mostly, ramping things out. And at the same time, slow your opponent down with some land destruction. So like these old school mono green tempo decks, one of the best things you can do is like play forest, elf, then turn 2, play forest, ice storm, an opponent's land, for instance. So you've ramped out your mana, you've slowed down your opponent. Then I found Premodern, and I'm like, oh, let me build a mono green deck in Premodern. Kind of try to do the same thing. A mono green tempo deck. I play out manimals, fast, efficient green creatures, and also run some land destruction against my opponent. So I was playing Winter's Grasp, Thermokarst, Wasteland, and I was playing different mana elves, trying to ramp out like a Blastoderm, after I've winter grassed my opponent or something. You know, very straightforward mono green tempo deck. I was also playing Plow Under. I got very excited to buy that card. I've played this deck against you a couple times. I've
Mhm.
modified it a little bit, but the idea is the same. Ramp out some efficient creatures and run some land destruction. These Oath Ponza decks, these Terravore Oath decks, they're a much stronger version of what I was trying to do. I wasn't even looking at Terravore. I didn't even think about Terravore.
Is it mostly the Terravore that makes it stronger? Is that what
The
you're
Terravore
saying?
and the Oath. Yeah, it's like so what do I do with my deck when I ramp out something? I ramp out a Ravenous Baloth. What does this deck do? It oaths out a 9/9 trample and Terravore. So,
Yeah.
you know, it's just their upside is just so much higher than the upside I have when my mono green Premodern land destruction deck works the way it's supposed to. First version I want to talk about, it's Oath Ponza from an online monthly tournament that was played September 18th, 2022. So we're going all the way back to 2022 for this deck. Oath Ponza 9/18/2022 TMOS. I'm going to start with the lands here, Alex. The lands. 28 lands. He runs 8 man lands. So you got your 4 Mishra's Factories, and you got your 4 Treetop Village. Why? Because mainlands are just a great way to kill an opponent. It's true in old school. It's true in pre-modern as well. In addition to that, he runs 4 wastelands, because remember, this is a land destruction deck. And then 4 Rishodon ports, which this doesn't destroy land, but, you know,
Yeah.
it's good to play in any style of prison deck where you're trying to
Yeah.
limit your opponent's
Still helps.
ability to do things. It's also devastating against people, especially in pre-modern, who are running like 3 or 4 colors, 3 or more colors. You can just use this to tap key lands and prevent them from doing a lot of different things. You just keep away that 1 blue mana or that 1 white mana or whatever it may be. So 28 lands, 8 of which facilitate your land destruction, mana denial strategy, 8 of which can function as creatures for you. Then I want to go to the sorceries.
And if you're, I mean, if you know, since this deck wants a ton of lands in, like you probably better make sure that a decent sized chunk of them are versatile or lands that do something special. You know, you don't want to just be like all forests. Like
Yeah,
you're
you'll find
wasting
yourself.
opportunities there.
Yeah,
Uh,
you'll find yourself just drawing chaff a lot of the time. That's the case. Sorceries, 12 cards that can destroy lands in the sorceries. You got your 4 Winter's Grasp, you got your 4 Thermokarst, you got your 4 Creeping Mold, and then 2 Mulch. Mulch is 1 colorless, 1 green. Sorcery, reveal the top 4 cards of your library to all players. Show them off. Put any of those cards that are lands into your hand and the rest into your graveyard. So here you're keeping the lands. It's not gonna pump your Terravore. I will say I don't necessarily know how to play this card.
One thing I'm wondering, and this probably isn't the main use for it in here, but I was thinking that okay, so the way this works, you're revealing four cards, and if all of them are lands, you're drawing all of them, you know?
Yeah.
I'm not saying that's going to happen every time, but mulch might be a way to get your hand size above the discard threshold so that at the end of your turn, you're discarding lands into your graveyard because your hand's too big.
Okay, you could do that if you wanted to use mulch to actually increase the number of lands that were in your graveyard. You could do that. I was also thinking, so if we go from the sorceries to the enchantments, this deck
Oh,
runs
exploration.
4 explorations. 1 green enchantment, you may play an additional land each turn. So, you know, we just mentioned you have 8 man lands in this deck. And you have lands like Rishodon Port and Wasteland for your mana denial strategy. So, like, you're mulching, and the lands that end up in your hand might not just be forests, they might actually be able to attack or to destroy your opponent's hand, and you can play out more than one
Yeah.
in a turn. So like mulch with exploration and this many mainlands could actually be a way to establish like a stronger creature board
Yeah,
state.
definitely. And using since you have lands that don't provide green mana, like Richon Port and Wasteland, now you get around having to waste one of your land drops
Yeah.
on, now you can play a forest and a wasteland, and
Yeah.
you still have the green mana you need.
Yeah, so I love exploration in this deck. I think it can work well sometimes with mulch. And I made notes. I love exploration specifically in a deck full of mainlands and utility lands because, like what you just said, you can ramp out attackers in the form of the mainlands. You can still get your ports and wastelands out fast, while also at the same time hitting all of your colored mana drops. You don't miss the colored mana drops.
This is one of the most excited, like this might be the most excited I've been about exploration. Like I know it's a good card and people use
Same.
it a lot, but right here in this deck, I feel like all of a sudden I don't know. I've seen it maybe in other decks where I don't know, it just didn't stick out as much to me as like
Yep.
synergizing and doing some cool things.
I haven't explored it all that much. And I know there are decks called lands decks, which, and they tend to have exploration in them. I haven't really examined these decks or piloted any of them, but I like this idea of like loading up on mainlands in addition to your general mana producing lands, your colored mana producing lands, along with exploration to just get out attackers and still hit all of your normal land drops.
Yeah, and I like being able
Versatility.
to like you don't have to worry about I worry a lot about how many lands I'm going to put in a deck and of which kinds, especially in pre-modern. So the way this deck works, you get to put a whole bunch of extra lands in, and it's kind of like it takes the pressure off you of like, having a bad first hand with no lands in it, or I mean maybe the opposite happens here, you get jammed up with but with the man lands and the port and the wasteland, I feel like you could still be doing something even if you're drawing just lands at the beginning of the game. So
Exactly. Yeah, like getting jammed up with lands in a deck built like this, it's still pretty much a good thing because 12 of these, 16 of these lands still facilitate your main strategies, which is to turn creatures sideways or to deny your opponent mana. So I
yeah,
like it a
yeah,
lot.
that's pretty cool.
No plow under here. Creeping Mold is the highest casting cost card at 4. I've thought about running Creeping Mold before. It gives you some more versatility. You can get rid of, enchantments or artifacts, which you don't have the ability to do a lot of that in green a lot of the time.
Yeah, I know a lot of people run that, and it's obviously pretty versatile. The casting cost scares me a bit, but I mean, in this deck, like you shouldn't have mana problems. He's playing those wild growths. You have extra
Oh yeah, 4 wild
land
growth too.
drops. Yeah, and since everything else in the deck is really low casting cost, it's kind of like, well, I don't mind maybe spending more for my thing that's like a very important removal card. Maybe maybe it takes out the keystone of my opponent's deck.
Mm-hmm. I brought the Creeping Mold up too, right before we move on to the next one, because the next version, this one's from December 11th, 2022. So also in the year 2022. He removed Creeping Mold.
Huh.
It was the highest casting cost card in the deck. He got rid of it. So the mana curve tops out now at 3. And he replaced Creeping Mold with 4 Sphere of Resistances. This is something that he mentioned in the podcast episode on the I Have Questions podcast, a pre-modern podcast hosted by William Hurst. He talked about how he started when he was first building decks like this. He started with Plow Under, but a lot of these cards just weren't worth the mana cost. He streamlined things. He put in lower casting cost cards, and it made me think about something that I said a couple episodes ago. It seems like most of the competitive decks I'm seeing, like so many of them, are topping out at 3. That's like the top of their mana curve, 3 casting costs. And then we also had a brief discussion about how if a card's 4 casting costs and it doesn't have the ability to end a game, should you play it? Like, uh, I didn't used to be so stingy with my casting costs building decks, and I'm still not, because sometimes I just like to play like a big, weird, crazy card.
Yeah.
But I am seeing more. Back in the day when we played, we weren't competitive players. We were very casual players. We still are casual players now, but I'm looking more at tournament decks, and I'm gaining more of an appreciation for keeping your casting costs low, like what I would consider to be severely low, like topping out at three mana, really.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I have to say that's kind of more what I expected getting back into this and starting to look at decks that are competitive decks. I kind of expected them to be like very, very fast, low, ultra efficient
Yeah.
decks. Because when we played, obviously, like we were pretty young and casual, but as we went on during the time period that we played back then, I definitely remember us getting how should I say, just more discerning about casting costs. We weren't always trying to like bring out big 5, 6 casting cost creatures all the time and stuff. Like we were pretty focused on that. So I guess what I'm trying to say is when I was expecting that to be the case, and when we started looking at pre-modern cards, I started noticing more that were kind of bigger casting cost cards sometimes, and it was surprising me. Um, I'm trying to think of some good examples now.
I was gonna say, what are some examples? Because the
How about
decks I've
something
been,
like a memory jar?
isn't that four?
Is it? Jeez. I have to look it up now.
I gotta look it up. Also, it's banned.
It's 5.
Okay,
It's 5 casting cost. Um,
it is banned now. It's banned in pre-modern.
yeah, but it was banned because it's good. I mean,
Yeah. Yeah. I think I can't remember the design of the memory jar deck, but my guess is it was run with like City of Traders and Grim Monolith and other
mm.
things that are Grim Monolith is banned in pre-modern. I don't remember if City of Traders is banned in pre-modern.
Yeah, I'm putting myself on the spot here now, trying to think of like competitive high casting cost cards, but you know, uh,
Yes, well, I understand what you were saying. Even from a young age, casting costs always mattered. I mean, we you learn very early on you shouldn't run Force of Nature necessarily in all your green decks. Yes, it's
yeah,
awesome.
you just get stuffed too many times trying to like bring
Yeah.
out some 5 or 6 casting cost card and it gets countered, or like you get mana screwed or something like that.
I guess what I'm surprised by is the extreme low casting costs that I'm seeing. And I'm being much more, here's what I'll say. I'm being much more discerning about whether or not a spell that costs more than three should go in my deck,
Mhm.
which that did not used to be my cutoff.
I've always just like just restricted the number of those higher casting cost
Yeah.
cards. Like I'm like I can fit in, only a few.
I would be perfectly happy running like a couple four casting cost cards and maybe like one or two five casting cost cards even. Those would have to have the ability to end a game.
Mhm. It
I found
depends on
myself,
your deck. Do you have like
yeah.
Cabal coffers in your deck and like
Yes, all of it,
a bunch
yes.
of different
I mean,
rituals?
all of that stuff matters, yeah, but
Hmm.
I'm just becoming more discerning about things that cost four and five than I was before.
Mm.
That's really the big difference. Uh, Never really ran decks back in the day that topped out at three. And I find myself building more of those recently. Anyways, this is the second version. Like I said, 4 sorceries removed, the creeping mold, replaced with Sphere of Resistance, which is a really cool artifact card. And a card that I think costs like over 20 bucks now. I wish it didn't. It's 2 colorless. All
Dang.
spells cost an additional 1 colorless to play. So this deck overall, is why I was bringing it up, has a very low casting cost, especially now, minus the creeping mold, tops out at 3. When combined with all the land destruction and the mana denial that you're pointing at your opponent, this makes it like even more difficult for your opponent to play
Yeah,
spells. I love the addition of the sphere.
it's winter orbesque,
It's Winter Orbesque,
once you get that going, yeah.
and it is just 2 casting costs. The lands. It made some other improvements here. Last version, so this still has 28 lands. Last version had 12 forests. This has 6 forests. So he
Oh,
eliminated 6 forests and he replaced them with 6 fetch lands, 3 windswept heath and 3 wooded foothills. I love this too. It further feeds the Terravore. I believe that's, unless there's another reason also why you would do that. I believe that's the only real reason.
yeah. I wonder why I didn't have them in initially.
I don't know. It could just be like these were decks that he played at actual tournaments. That's how they ended up on TC decks. Uh I'm gonna go with one reason. Maybe he didn't have them at the time. Like when I build decks on Moxfield a lot. I put in whatever just to try to build an optimal version of it. But when you and I play in paper or something,
Yeah,
suboptimal because it's just based on what I have at the time.
yeah,
That could be one reason. Another reason could just be didn't think about it. I don't know. Don't know. But it seems like an obvious improvement, right? Feed the Terravore.
yeah.
Next one. This is version number 3. Come on, version number 3. Version number 3 of Oath Ponza, December 2023. We're now in 2023. They made some additional expensive changes to the deck. The deck is getting better. It's also
Yeah.
getting more expensive to build. So in addition to the fetch lands, you've now added Mox Diamond. So you have 4 Mox Diamonds. Another thing that can feed the Terravore,
Right.
but
We're
also
still going
provides
terrible.
some ramp. Mox Diamond comes into play, choose and discard a land card or sacrifice Mox Diamond. You have a lot of lands, so you're probably gonna, this version has 30 lands. You're definitely gonna have an early land to pitch to the Mox Diamond to ramp out 2 mana turn 1. Uh, what's different here about the lands? You've added Hickory Woodlot, which I thought was interesting. This is a land from Mercadian Mask. Hickory Woodlot comes into play tapped with 2 depletion counters on it. You can tap and remove a depletion counter from Hickory Woodlot to add 2 green mana to your mana pool. If there are no depletion counters on Hickory Woodlot, sacrifice it. So basically, you drop the Hickory Woodlot, can't do anything with it on turn 1, but on turn 2, you could technically get 4 mana out of it. It would be a one-time use, but you can get 4 mana out of it.
Yeah. And I mean, you might not want to do this because you're going to lose your wild growth, but if you needed to, you could put the wild growth on it, like when the turn it comes into play tapped, buff it up with the wild growth. Now next turn it can tap for 3 mana.
Yeah, it would be a good first turn play. And then second turn, you could play a forest. You could wild growth that forest. You could tap and sack the Hickory Woodlot for 4 mana, and then you could play like a Winter's Grasp and an Exploration, or you could play a Sylvan and an Oath, or you could play a Sphere of Resistance and Exploration.
Yeah.
There's so much you could do on turn 2.
I could see it definitely helping you get like a land destruction spell off early.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And then you don't mind that the land's ultimately destroyed a turn or two later because you're feeding the Terravore.
Yeah. And if you happen to have an Exploration in your hand or something, you could cast that land destruction spell and an Exploration in the same turn, play an additional land to replace the Hickory Woodlot.
Yeah.
Interesting. I'd have to play with it a little while to see how many times it actually benefited me versus hurting me. But it provides some interesting ramp, I think.
Yeah, I wouldn't have thought that wouldn't have jumped out at me to add, but now that I see it in here, I'm like, oh, okay, makes sense.
And it goes to the graveyard, so it further feeds the Terravore. The only thing is, you've added 2 additional lands to get 4 Hickory Woodlots in here, and now you've lost 2 explorations. So I'm not sure. I like the idea of the exploration in this deck so much. I don't know. I'd have to play it out
Hmm.
to see how often I need it. In addition to the Hickory Woodlot and the Mox Diamond, also introduced in this deck, Smokestack. So now we're back up. We got another 4 forecasting cost card in here. Talked a little bit about Smokestack edition on the podcast. I can't remember what he said about it though. I will say, I noted that this version has even more lands than the other two. 30, 30 lands. If you have 30 lands plus exploration, you may be able to get more. I mean, you should be able to get more permanents on the board than your opponent, right? So if you have more lands out on the board than your opponent because of the number of lands in your deck and the exploration, you play the smokestack, you should have a lot more stuff to sacrifice to the smokestack than your opponent.
Yeah.
Like it seems like a pretty good prison build. You should be able to asymmetrically take advantage of the smokestack or
Yeah.
asymmetrically
If you have the
be hurt less
smokestack,
than the stack.
if you have the smokestack down and working for a couple turns, and they have to sacrifice a few things, then you could pitch your sphere of resistance to the smokestack because like now you don't like need it as much anymore, maybe. You
Yeah.
know? Does that make sense? Now you've like built a decent lead and now you're not as worried about them, you know. Or maybe that's counterproductive. Maybe you just want that sphere of resistance then to be working even harder because then they have like no lands left.
I like the idea of the smokestack though. I think you should have more
Yeah.
or more less critical permanence to sack to the
Yeah, I
smokestack.
agree. I mean, you have extra lands to put down with exploration. Uh, you have a lot of land in your deck. Um,
A very low mana curve. So, if you're sacrificing lands and they're sacrificing creatures, even if you're sacrificing lands, you still should be able to play out everything here pretty easily,
mhm.
other than another smokestack.
Yeah, you're playing extra and you're destroying their lands. It seems he took the wild growths out of this deck, huh?
That's right. Yeah, wild growth isn't in here.
Okay.
Mulch isn't in here, but that's been gone. I don't think mulch was in the last version. Oh no. Yeah, two mulch in the last version. Here we don't see any mulch. We don't see any wild growth. We see the addition of the smokestack. We see the Mock's diamonds. We see a more expensive deck to build in paper. But I like where it's going. It's getting more prisony.
Hmm.
Now you're
And I
not
guess
just
you'd be playing the smokestack before the sphere of resistance, probably, like ideally, right? That seems to make more sense. You don't want the smokestack to cost 5 mana.
5. Yeah.
And I guess, yeah, you want to destroy a few of their lands and then have the sphere of resistance working when they're starved for mana. Okay.
I don't know how well the smokestacks can do. I've never played smokestack. Uh yeah, I'm not sure like everything we've seen the deck do so far with the sphere of resistance, the mana denial, Oath and Out of Terravor, it seems like it should be enough in the absence of the smokestack. Now, the things I could be worried about if I don't have smokestack. What are you worried about if you just have the Oath Terravor, mana denial
Well,
strategy? You're worried about them bringing out something gigantic. That's
or just
maybe
something
even
you can't deal with because the smokestack isn't targeted removal, but it's still removal, and it's a way for your deck to get rid of artifacts and enchantments and things that might be, that otherwise you might have creeping molded in the old version of the deck.
something getting rid of something you can't deal with. Yeah, so that's the general reason to bring it in, but that's why I'm thinking, does smokestack really help? Because they get to choose.
Yeah.
Now, the alternative is you put in targeted removal in your deck, but then you take up a bunch of different spaces with a
I
couple
mean, obviously them
naturalizes.
choosing is worse, but it's happening every turn. So like all they can do really is stall, and then eventually they have to get rid
Yeah.
of the permanent that you want them to get rid of.
You have to hope that whatever it is they bring out that's particularly problematic to you isn't going to kill you in a few turns.
Yeah.
It has to be something that you can deal with for a while until the smokestack whittles it away. Something you can just at least put up like a stable defense against. I don't know. But what kind of stable defense do you put up with this deck?
I mean, the other thing about the smokestack too is you get to decide whether or not to put counters on it. So you can ramp up how many permanents everyone is sacrificing every turn if you want.
That's true. I'm forgetting
So, I mean,
about
that can
that.
get nasty really fast.
I'm
Like if there's
forgetting
something
about that, that it's
yeah,
additive
if you need to get
if
rid
you
of
want it to
something,
be.
you can just start putting more counters on it. And then you can sacrifice the smokestack to itself when it's your turn to sacrifice your thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay.
Plus all the extra lands you've brought out.
Final version I want to talk about. This is a version that won the Misty Mountain Games Premodern Fall Cup. Oath Ponza Premodern Fall Cup at Misty Mountain Games 9/23/2023. What do we got here? Mulch is back, baby.
All right.
Whoever piloted this loves the mulch. And they did exactly what I was thinking about maybe I would do instead of the smokestack. We see a main board naturalize, we see a main board powder keg. So these are alternative ways to get rid of some problematic permanents on your opponent's side. I'm actually not sure what's the best thing to do. Do you main board a smokestack or do you main board a naturalize and a powder keg?
Yeah, I mean, I can see both ways. They each have pros and cons.
Yeah, I'm leaning more towards the keg and the naturalize. I have no idea why. Maybe just because the powder keg scares me. I mean, sorry, the smokestack scares me.
Yeah,
I
I mean,
have
I
no.
like that they're lower casting cost, obviously, but
That's true. Yeah, they're also not forecasting cost. They're easier to cast if you already have your sphere of resistance out.
yeah. Smokestack's just nastier overall, though, I think. Just like the potential to be stronger.
We got
See
a Dust
Dust
Bowl
Bowl
here too.
now? Yeah.
Yeah, he added one Dust Bowl in addition to the 4 Wastelands. I really like Dust Bowl. I mean, especially in this deck where you have also he took out the explorations. Yeah,
Wild growth back in.
wild growth back in.
Okay.
I really like the explorations in the deck. I really like the idea with having all these utility lands
You
and
mean
being
Dust
able to,
Bowl?
yeah. But I really like the idea of being able to put out a utility land and a forest at the same time, on the same turn.
Oh, okay. You were going back because you started to say something about Dust Bowl. I thought you just said the wrong thing.
Oh, but I was talking about exploration. I talked about Dust Bowl, but then that got me thinking about exploration because you can put additional lands down. So when you have to
Yes.
sacrifice it to the Dust Bowl, it's like not a
Yeah.
big deal. And yeah, when I first started talking about the Dust Bowl, that's when I noticed that there's no exploration. And I was like, oh, I particularly like those two together, exploration plus Dust Bowl.
Oh, huh.
So I don't know. They're all very strong. I kind of want to run it with exploration
So he doesn't really do anything here to get lands out
and no
faster, huh?
mulch.
There's nothing for that exploration category.
Correct.
Okay.
I kind of want to take out the mulch and put it to exploration. That's just me. I don't know anything. But I like exploration in this deck so much. Because of the main lands, because of the mana denial lands. And now with the Dust Bowl on top of that. I don't know. But those are
Take
4
out
versions.
one mulch and the one wild growth, put into explorations, and then you'd still have one mulch.
1 mulch.
Maybe.
Wild growth is nice, but
I like the wild growths. It's just now there's only one in there, and I'm kind of like wondering if you only have one.
And do you need it when you're running such a low casting cost curve? He does have a few for. Oh,
Like I think you
sorry.
want
No, it
something
still
in
tops
there
out at 3.
to,
Yeah.
like I think you want something in there to, while you're destroying their lands, make your lands better, whether that's laying down more lands or using the wild growths to make them produce more, you know. Um,
I think I would go the exploration route over wild growth. Yeah. But who knows?
I kind of do too in this deck just because you have so many man lands and stuff and you want to maybe get several lands
That's
out.
why I want an attack route. But now I'm like, okay, do you need to get a Mishra's Factory out to do 2 damage when ultimately your goal is to oath out a 9/9 trample on Terravore?
Right.
maybe no.
I mean, maybe, I don't know, maybe you need them as chump blockers while you're getting set up.
That is true. They will block a goblin lackey where a terravore will not until you oath it out a little bit later. Factory could potentially deal with a lackey early on, depending on who goes first and whether or not you have a naturalize. I mean, an exploration to get out a factory in another land. Anywho, I like this deck. Alex, you're going to be facing some versions of this deck in the not too distant
Oh,
future. I'm going to be
okay.
playing the hell out of this mono green, mana denial, Terravore Oath deck. It does kind of what I was trying to do, but much better, much more explosive. It's much more explosive on its in its attack, and it's much more irritating in its mana denial strategy in the thing that I've built. So it's better on both ends. And you know, it can be fairly strong as a budget deck without the diamonds and the fetches. I still think it's a solid deck without the diamonds and the fetches.
Yeah.
It probably it doesn't win the Misty Mountain Games Premodern Fall Cup without the diamonds and the fetches, but it's still strong. That's the end. That's the end of our introduction to the current mono green Oath Ponza decks.
I like it.
That's the end of segment 1. That's going to bring us to segment 2. Alex, I have original art alert. Some original art has hit the market. I thought this was super cool. It is the Force of Will, the original Force of Will art being auctioned at Heritage Auction. If you're listening to this, the auction is now over. So you cannot purchase it. I'm sorry. I'm sorry for you. But you know what? Unless you had $350,000 to blow, I shouldn't say blow, to spend, to blow, really, on a piece of original Magic the Gathering art, then who cares if it's over already? But that's ultimately what it went for, $350,000.
Wow.
I thought this was pretty cool when I saw this article. The article that I'm talking about right now is posted on, is her name Therese Wilson or Therese Nielsen or Teresa Nielsen? I always forget. T. Nielsen. Therese Nielsen. It's on her website, theresenielsen.com. She mentioned that it was being auctioned off. She talked a little bit about it. A little bit about the history of how the piece of art came to be. That's her holding the original piece. And somebody bought it a long time ago. Not sure if she said exactly when. The original buyer in Sweden. They've now put it up for sale. She mentioned that Force of Will, I think, was the very first piece she ever worked on for Wizards of the Coast. She was contacted by the person that was the art director at the time, brought in to do some work for alliances. She was given a set of cards to work on. Force of Will, Energy Arc, which we may or may not have talked about not that long ago, briefly on the show. She did the 2 arts for the Elvish Rangers. I always forget she did the Sexy Elf. This looks, I mean, I see this. If you were just show me this card, 1,000 out of 1,000 times, if you were to show me this card and ask me if it was illustrated by a man or woman, I would be like, a guy, some dude did that. But I always forget that this is Therese Nielsen art. And she did the 2 different arts for Foresight.
Okay.
Search your library for any 3 cards, remove them from the game, shuffle your library afterwards. Draw a card at the beginning of the next turn's upkeep. Remove them from the game. Force of Will, I mean, I remember all these cards from back in the day from Alliances, but Force of Will was the big star. It's the one that's really become iconic, the one that people still play all the time. It was the very first card that she made for them. And she mentioned this. This was interesting to me. Back in the early days of Magic, the art direction and description tended to be much looser. I wish I still had the original art description on a fax scrap of paper. As far as I can remember, this is all it said. Red card. depict a shaman using fire or red magic. Working title, stop spell. So she mentioned here that it was originally supposed to be a red card. That seemed weird to me. And I think she says, I believe that's kind of what inspired, part of what inspired the look for the card. All of that vibrant red and white kind of clashes with the blue border around it. I shouldn't say clash, stands out.
Mm-hmm.
But I don't know if this is actually true. One, it doesn't really make sense because if you remember, Force of Will was part of a cycle of pitch cards, and there's already a red pitch card. I believe it's Pyrokinesis.
I've heard this before, though. I think
I
I've
think I
heard
have
someone
too.
talk about how it was, yeah, when they were first setting this up, it was mistakenly called a red card, or the first initial idea was for it to be a red card.
There was somebody on Twitter who I follow. I believe that his account is called I don't know if his account is Order of the Ebon Hand or if he just has the artwork
Oh,
for
okay.
Order of the Ebon Hand as his avatar. So I always think that's his name. Initiate of the Ebon Hand, Jason at Jason Vorthos on Twitter. I think he read this article, or this article had been going around. Different people have read it, and he sent a tweet to Mark Rosewater. Yeah, this was just 2 days ago. At Maro254, there's an urban legend going around the internet that Force of Will, playtest named Stop That, was supposed to be a red counterspell. Is this true? Question mark. And Mark Rosewater answered right away. He just said no. So, she says she doesn't have the original facts. She could misremember. It could also be true that like who knows, maybe sometime early in the process, some person just randomly goes, hey, wouldn't it be cool if we had some kind of red counterspell? And then that was the end of it. And then afterwards, they decided to put together this cycle. But they never intended the blue card in the cycle to actually be the red counterspell. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
It doesn't make sense. Because like I said, the pitch spells were part of a cycle. So
Well, but that's assuming they had that whole cycle laid out already
that's
and
true.
didn't add some of them after they made like the first card.
Very early talks, somebody could have mentioned something about some card stopping a spell and being a red card. Very true.
Yeah.
But Mark Rosewater says, at least according to his memory, Force of Will was never supposed to be a red card. Not that important. But I thought that was interesting. I was like, oh man, was it supposed to be a red card? Red card. What inspired the look of Force of Will? Reptiles, football, Kiss, and Wolverine. I never thought about this before, but I see these words written out, and then I look back at Force of Will, and it really does almost look like Gene Simmons uh mixed with Wolverine doing
I
the
always noticed that he has like
pose.
stubbier Wolverine claws. Yeah, there's that like Wolverine. He has like the Wolverine hands, but they aren't like full Wolverine claws.
And the
The
armor,
armor I never really like looked at too
neither did
closely.
I.
Just because the card in general, like these are pretty small details. I was always more focused on like the fire of the card,
Yeah.
the red, you know.
But yeah, so they're like large, jagged, configured like football pads. So like toothed football pads.
Yeah, or like Guar.
Guar, yeah. He does have needle teeth, reptile-like. Good old Gene Simmons from Kiss was likely lurking in my subconscious as an influence from my teens. Remember his Destroyer album costume. Sizable hairdo, monstrous appearance, lizard boots. And then there's the Wolverine archetype. Don't mess with me vibe. I don't know if she did these two altars. She must have, because that's her signature, I think. But yeah, when you look at these two things, and then you look at the Force of Will art, it is almost like
Yeah.
Gene Simmons mixed with mixed with Wolverine. So I thought that was pretty cool. Anyways, a little bit of history of Force of Will and the artwork, what inspired it, all in this article here on her page, teamnielsen.com. little bit of history of the conception of Force of Will. Was it supposed to be a red spell? Morrow says no. And then it's interesting to see what some of this stuff goes for. You know, I know that our original Magic the Gathering art there's coming a bigger and bigger market for that. Magic the Gathering was always collectible from the very beginning. People started collecting the cards. There were fewer people collecting one, artist proofs, and two, the original art. I think that stuff is getting bigger and bigger and getting more and more expensive. I wonder if there's ever going to be a time. Well, yeah, there already is a time. It's $350,000. I mean, that's more expensive than almost any Magic card ever sold.
Yeah.
What was more than that? The stupid One Ring. I shouldn't say it's the fun One Ring. It was stupid, but also fun. The stupid fun One Ring that they just printed last year, which I always forgot. I already forgot how much that went for. Did it go for $2 million or something? Am I crazy?
Yeah.
Yeah, $2 million. And then the other card, Post Malone bought. So maybe the first original painting that Post Malone buys will become the most expensive painting ever sold. The Force of Will painting sold circa 1998 at GP Stockholm, sold for $2,200. So 1998, you could have bought an iconic piece of original Magic the Gathering art for about $2,000. 25 years later, 350,000. When do they start hitting $1 million plus? It depends how high crypto goes.
Not bad though.
Anyways, that's it. I just thought that was cool. I wanted to talk about that. That's the end of segment 2, Alex. But we're gonna keep going.
Interesting.
We ain't
Iconic
done.
card.
We ain't done yet. We have a third segment for your ear holes tonight. Or, it might not be night when you're listening. Segment 3 is the return of the Old Men Magic Commander Corner. What do I want to talk about in the Commander Corner? I want to talk about Oubliette.
Awesome.
Why do I want to talk about Oubliette? Because I bought a damn Oubliette. I wanted to pick up some more Arabian Nights. I'm really just buying Arabian Nights commons and stuff. I got myself a couple rook eggs. I got myself some Wailuli wolves. Forgot they were called Wailuli wolves. If you would have asked me 6 months ago, I would have said, of course they're Wailuli wolves, not Wailuli wolves. There's no additional L in there. I would have been wrong. I was looking at the other commons that are so affordable. I came across Oubliette. I was like, ooh, I don't have one of those. Let me buy an Oubliette. Now I'm proud owner of a single Oubliette. Now I have to figure out what the hell do I do with it. Wasn't sure what to do with it. I mean, it's obvious what it does, but do I want to play it? I don't know. Is it good enough to play in anything? Well, I started looking around to see if anybody did things with Oubliette, because I heard something about people potentially playing this in Commander a lot. I heard rumblings that it was popular in Commander. I came across this article on hipstersofthecoast.com, written by Kristen Gregory at the Kristen Emily, titled, "So What's the Deal with Oubliette?" That was my Seinfeld voice. What's the deal with Oubliette? And in this article, she explained to me what the deal with Oubliette was. I'm going to keep this kind of brief. If we look at the original, everybody who plays Commander might know this already, but I don't. And this segment is about Alex and I learn about what the hell's going on in Commander. So I'm discussing the basics here. Arabian Nights Oubliette, 1 colorless, 2 black. Side note, related note, I always buy the Arabian Nights cards, whereas the colorless casting cost is dark.
Yeah, I like the dark ones too, yeah.
Now
And
the
it's
light
not
ones,
trying to cheat like you.
well, it's partly because I'm trying to cheat, yeah. But the light ones, they're far more expensive. They're significantly more expensive, always. And I understand why, because it's a difference in the print run.
Mhm.
But The darker ones are so much cooler that I feel like people
I
should
think
want
so
them more.
too, because that's like the only time that ever happened was in,
Yes.
you know, that about Arabian Nights cards. It's the thing with Arabian Nights cards. So I feel like if I'm gonna own, you know, especially a black card from Arabian Nights,
Yes.
like I want it to be one of those.
It's so cool. It really puts you back at that time when they were terrible at printing cards. And they got better, but then they got terrible again because now they can't print foil, so don't print. But yeah, it's so Arabian Nights. It's perfect. Like that's what I want. I want the dark ones. Anyways, one colorless, two black enchantment. You select a creature in play when Oubliette is cast. That creature is considered out of play as long as Oubliette is in play. Hence, the creature cannot be the target of spells and cannot receive damage, use special powers, attack, or defend.
Do
All
things.
counters and enchantments on the creature remain, but are also out of play. If Oubliette is removed, creature returns to play tapped. So I read this and it's like essentially it puts it into some sort of exile.
Yeah.
Exiles the creature. That's the original Arabian Nights text. What I learned from reading this article is that there was a relatively recent reprinting of Oubliette, and associated with that reprint and Double Masters, there was a relatively recent update to the text of Oubliette. So there's now an Oracle update. And if we look at the Double Masters version of Oubliette, not nearly as cool looking. Because you don't have that crazy mana symbol. You don't have that sweet, sweet old border. It now reads, when Oubliette enters the battlefield, target creature phases out until Oubliette leaves the battlefield. This blew my mind. Tap that creature as it phases in this way. This blew my mind because I thought Magic the Gathering didn't like phasing as a mechanic. So it surprised me that in 2022 they would reprint. One, it's weird that they decided to reprint Oubliette. I'm not sure why. Maybe it was already gaining popularity in Commander as like a removal spell for black. So they
That's
wanted
kind of
to
what I'm guessing. It was
reprint.
probably on the radar.
But it surprised me. It doesn't surprise me that they would have reworded the text because I read that old one. I mean, that's very
Yeah. It's back
on
when
brand for
language was
old
not
Magic.
standardized.
Yeah, it's far longer and more convoluted than it needs to be. But it surprised me that they changed it to phasing because I didn't think they liked phasing as a mechanic. But maybe they did it on purpose because they wanted to make the card stronger for Commander. I don't know. Because this change to phasing made a huge difference, apparently. Under the old rules text for Oubliette, if it targeted your commander, it would trigger an exile, which would allow you to use the replacement effect to put your commander in the command zone instead. So what's changed? I was like, what the hell is that? What the hell is the replacement effect even? Start doing some reading. This is from the commander rules. If a commander would be exiled from anywhere or put into its owner's hand, graveyard, or library from anywhere, its owner may put it into the command zone instead. This replacement effect may apply more than once to the same event. So basically, the way it used to work is it would exile a creature, a target creature, as it always did. If you used Oubliette to exile their commander, according to the replacement effect, or because of the replacement effect, the commander would then go to the command zone. So it would be removed from the battlefield, go back to the command zone where they could recast it. If I'm getting this correct. Does this all sound right to you, Alex? Since they changed it to phasing, the replacement effect no longer occurs. It doesn't go back to the command zone. So it's actually like phased out along with anything attached to it until somebody gets rid of Oubliette. So it can remove somebody's commander from the game unless they have a way to eliminate Oubliette from the battlefield. Yeah. So they made the card a lot more powerful in Commander. So buy all your Oubliettes now, people. It's just going to keep going up.
Yeah, I mean, they made it more powerful, but I also feel like they made it work the way it was intended. You know what I mean?
They did. The whole replacement effect for a commander is kind of weird to me.
Yeah, it's not a rule that seems like a lot of the other rules in Magic. Like compared to the way the game works, if like we were out of the game for so long and then we learned about the commander replacement effect, and it's kind of like it seems like a rule from
Why?
another game a little bit, you know? What what'd you say?
I said why.
Oh,
Yeah, I was just saying why would they
yeah.
why would that happen? Why does it work that way? Yeah, it's weird.
Um, so yeah, I think this was probably a situation where you had this card that didn't do what it was, you know, meant to do really anymore because of that. And they're like, here's an opportunity to A, fix the card, and B, also do something to the commander format. Maybe they felt like they needed, another card that could deal with commanders a little bit better.
Yeah.
Um,
This leads me to another question. Is there a way we have almost no experience with Commander. We've each built one Commander deck. And we haven't played much of it at all, but we're learning. Are there what other ways are there to deal with somebody's commander permanently? If even exile in a commander just puts it back into the command zone where it can then be recast for more mana later.
yeah, I don't know that there are, like, I mean, you might use something like Paralyze, that works similar to Oubliette. Um, Paralyze is one black enchantment and it taps the creature, and they have to
Yeah.
pay 4 to untap it.
Just stuck there most of the time.
Yeah.
And
So,
then
but I mean, they
maybe,
can get around that by paying the mana. So,
yeah, maybe there just aren't many spells that can remove the commander permanently because they don't want there to be many spells to remove the
yeah.
commander
Well, I
permanently
mean,
because you're playing a game called Commander.
pretty much everything either sends it to the graveyard or exiles a
Yeah,
card. You know what I mean? Like
yeah.
there's just not many other options. Phasing was one of the only other options.
So you got to find things that permanently or for a significant number of turns phase out the commander. That's how you do
Repeatedly phase out the commander.
it. Yeah.
Also, this taps it when it comes back in too, which is, it's gonna have an edge over other phasing cards because of
Yeah.
that. So that's nice.
Yeah. So
Yeah,
anyways,
let's do
I thought it was
another
kind of
follow-up
interesting.
on
That was
phasing
interesting.
cards for commander.
What do you say? We'll do a follow-up on the phasing cards for commander.
Yeah, maybe we can find some phasing cards that target the commander and phase the commander out. Work similar to this.
I'm typing future old men magic commander corner. Phasing the commander. Other ways
Another thing,
to permanently deal with the commander.
yeah, another thing, I mean, this isn't so permanent or anything, but an alternate way to deal with commanders, I guess, is to do something that increases the casting cost so that they already have to be paying more to bring it back every time.
It gets harder and harder
Now
every time, yeah.
you're doing something like using the orb that I've already forgotten the name of that we just talked about 10 minutes ago.
Sphere of resistance.
Sphere of
Sphere,
resistance.
Alex. What are you talking about? Orbs. It's a sphere. What's the difference between a sphere and an orb? Are orbs all spherical? I think so.
Yeah, sure, yeah.
Yeah.
An orb is a subcategory of sphere, maybe. There's something.
Orb, a spherical body, a globe. I was going to say that could be a potential future follow-up for the Old Man Magic podcast, but we don't need to do a future
We
follow-up.
just solved it now, yeah.
Okay. That's all I got, Alex.
All right. I
I think that was a successful episode 69 of the Old Man Magic podcast.
think we did it. It's
We
almost Christmas.
we can't make any stupid juvenile jokes about our episode number until we reach 420, so it's going to be a while. There's no funny numbers between
That's to be a
70
huge episode.
and 419. I got nothing left for the day, Alex. Do
I
you
don't
have
think
any parting words for the listeners? I'm not going to ask you for words of wisdom. Just ask if you have any parting words. You could simply say, "No, I don't have any parting words." It's everything. you need to say.
everyone be careful and have a nice holiday.
Happy upcoming holidays. Actually, some holidays are already going on right now.
Yeah, yeah. For all the
Happy
holidays.
happy upcoming and or current
Just because
holidays.
you say tell people to enjoy the holidays doesn't mean that you hate Christmas or you want to destroy
Oh,
Christmas.
that's what I thought you meant. I got triggered. I was gonna go as soon as we stopped recording. I was gonna start screaming at you, ask you if you were, what's with your war on Christmas, Alex?
Yeah, it's understandable.
It's a war you've been fighting for like 30 some years. The war's over. Christmas has won, supposedly.
As it always does.
We can't celebrate Christmas anymore. I've been hearing that my whole life. Celebrating Christmas. We're actively celebrating Christmas, and I'm hearing some people about how you can't yell about how you can't celebrate Christmas anymore. Isn't that funny how that works?
Yeah.
We've been hearing that our whole lives. Long after we're dead, there's still going to be people probably screaming about how they can't celebrate Christmas as they're celebrating Christmas. Anyways, talk to you next week, everybody.